Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and this morning we're visiting in studio with the most amazing Michael Hart. Michael, welcome back to Revealing the Truth. We meet with Michael on the first Monday of every month for the Michael Hart Hour. Michael is known to many of you as the host of the Michael Hart Show on 101.1 FM, and he is the author of Unknown America, Myths and Little Known Oddities About the Greatest Nation on Earth. Newly released, we're delighted to have it here. I have a copy of it available to you. Go to the Books and Media page at ignitingnation.com, click on Unknown America, and you will find out things about this country you never, ever knew. Michael has an amazing background and insight for what most would consider to be of interest, but I would say it's fascination with our country. So Michael, writing this book, I kind of went through the entire life cycle of from conception all the way through being able to hold this book in my hand. How did you find that process?
The process of writing it? Arduous, very arduous. The book itself probably has, I don't know, 300 or 400 entries into it, but the problem actually has been that researching some of them, which might be considered the most incendiary. So it's a simple fact of the matter that I spent probably 7 or 8 years actually putting the book together, but it was the research portion of it that was the most arduous, the most task-oriented, if you will.
You know, when you were going through this, we kept looking at a date. It's going to be ready December. It's going to be ready January. It's going to be ready February. Life, right? But what's interesting is, and I share this because, you know, we interview a lot of authors.
Yes, we do.
And our talks are usually surrounding the headlines, what's going on in America. Certainly this omnibus that just got passed to keep the doors of government open. But watching you go through this as a novelist and as a nonfiction writer, I too struggled with what goes in, what comes out,
right.
How picky do we have to be? And this was a project that you undertook in its entirety as someone that wanted to have absolute creative control.
Absolutely.
Absolute control in all areas of it so that it was 100% your work, not an editor, not a publishing company. And I find it incredibly encouraging that regardless of how arduous the process was, is that you endured and you came out on the other side of it with a book. A book which is bound, the typeface looks good, and the content is excellent. I think you take the reader through a real deep understanding of one, you have a tremendous heart for history. You too, like I do, have 2 books by your side at all times. The 2 books that I keep by my side are the Bible and the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States.
Correct.
You and I, for many, many years, have shared this feeling that if you could only have 2 books in your hand in this country, that those are the 2 books to have. Now you've come out with this book, Unknown America, Myths and Little Known Oddities About the Greatest Nation on Earth. There's 3 stunning things in that title. First of all, myths. We've been led to believe a whole lot of things in this country that aren't true.
Oh, there's a laundry list of them. We even have what we call Mythbuster alerts scattered throughout the book itself. They range for everything from the story behind Rosa Parks, Betsy Ross, the very first legal slave owner in the United States of America, the international slave trade that we speak so much. And I got into that with the book because of all the discussions we've had in recent years about reparations being paid back to certain parts of the community. And although I don't debunk necessarily the justification for that, when people understand the truth of what's going on in terms of the U.S. history, so many of the things that are going on in this country today begin to shape up and make a lot more sense. There is some falsehoods that we have been taught over the years about the creation of the Star-Spangled Banner. People talk all the time about how the Constitution has separation of church and state, although it wasn't in the U.S. Constitution. But it's also interesting to note that 8 of the original 13 colonies had official religions that if you did not practice, you could be persecuted for not practicing them. There's been a lot of debate about whether or not the country was founded on Christian principles. Well, the very first resolution of the First Continental Congress was that all meetings must be opened up with prayer. And so we don't just get into the religious stuff. I get into sports, music, Americana, memorabilia, the founders, the framers. It's just chock full of a lot of things that either history omitted, got wrong, or completely fabricated.
One of the unique characteristics of Michael Hart, Michael Hart's approach, Michael Hart's understanding is that your study of history has more than equipped you to draw parallels between what's happening today, right now, in Congress, right now in the White House, right now in the world. All these things parallel our history with developments that have taken place that you covered in your book, that we have an understanding that the media is feeding us that perpetuates some of these falsehoods, some of these erroneous ways of thinking.
Absolutely.
You know, I'm watching a judge who has only one task of a judge. A judge, his only job is to interpret and apply the law as it relates to a case.
That's correct.
That's set in front of him. Am I incorrect?
No, not at all.
Okay. That's the job definition of a judge.
That is correct.
But we have judges now that are making opinions on whether or not they think this country is in danger of foreign immigrants coming in with an agenda opposed to the United States. That's not the rule of law on a case in front of them.
Right.
We just had another injunction by a judge that has no authority whatsoever outside his jurisdiction. Have we seen these patterns in the past where the judiciary has overstepped to the point and the nation bends to it because the man says he's a judge?
Yes and no. One of the things that's interesting about the judiciary, and I brought this up on my program probably 3 or 4 days ago, is the desire, particularly of the Democrat Party, to what I refer to as weaponize, in particular, the Supreme Court. And of course, that trickles down to lower courts as well. Back during the administration of Franklin Roosevelt, he had what he called the court packing plan, where he was trying to go from 9 justices to a total of 15 that would rotate out on a predetermined chronological basis for the purposes of the White House also being able to appoint these judges without confirmation. So we have seen attempts, particularly from the left, the Progressive Party in the past, to try to influence the highest court in the land, which of course would trickle down as well. The activism part of it, you didn't see quite so much back in the day because they understood their role. They understood that they were there to be the guardians of the Constitution, if you will. Moving forward, many of the earliest justices, John Jay and people like this, were what they would have called originalists. And an originalist is, Scalia was one, Gorsuch is one. They don't just look at the words in the Constitution, they try to get inside the head of the authors and what they meant in terms of the vernacular or lexicon at the time it was written as they understood it. And almost all judges from the early 1800s, moving all the way through the first part of the 20th century, all of them adhered to that same kind of philosophy. They wanted to protect the ideologies embodied in the Constitution, not just the words. As you are well aware, as a broadcaster, as a rabbi, as a speaker, words can be left open to interpretation. So they went beyond just the interpretation in the modern day lexicon, as I say, and they looked at the times it was written in, and judges have definitely, for the most part, moved away from that today.
What we're seeing in Washington today, this partisanship that is so clear that the interests of the constituents are not being fairly represented.
Of course not.
The voice of the American citizen in the description of who a representative is, and the description of who a senator is, they are to be the voice and the single point of contact on behalf of the people they represent.
Right.
And therefore, regardless of their personal opinion, they are obligated under the charter, the mandate of the position they've been elected to adhere to the will of the people. But they don't.
No. No. Most of them take their own personal philosophies, whether they're taking it to Montgomery or to D.C. And most people believe, politicians today believe, if I am voted into office, that I have received a mandate for my personal philosophies, as opposed to the way it was originally intentioned to be representative of the majority of the people within that district. Interestingly enough, there was a time in this country where representatives, because now they're all dealing with the popularity of the vote count, there was a time in this country where, let's just assume that you had a 50% turnout, somebody gets elected, that person goes to D.C., they would still look at the overall perception of the people that they represented as opposed to the people simply that voted for them. And that was because they spent time in those districts. And when I say spent time, not always physically, but via letters or whatever the case may be, any kind of correspondence that they have. But they understand it had nothing to do with their own personal philosophy, and it even didn't necessarily always have to do with the majority of voters' philosophy, but rather the majority philosophy of all people within that district.
Let me run this very idealistic, but even potentially possible scenario. We have programs like SurveyMonkey or many software products which allow for you to do an instantaneous survey. We have ways to put on Twitter, here's 3 choices, check 1 box, and we get instant.
Yes.
What if, maybe it's revolutionary, what if on these matters which are coming before the Senate, these matters which are coming before Congress, they polled their constituency to see how the constituency wanted them to vote? Wouldn't that be more in keeping with the intention of our system of representation than the way we do it now, which is Chuck Schumer does not represent anything more than the Democratic Party. He does not represent the heart, soul, or spirit of the population of the state that put him there.
Right.
He is open to no differing opinions whatsoever other than the party line for the purpose of, clearly the purpose of undermining the current administration. What if we had the ability to respond? What if that's the part of the citizenry that wanted to have a voice, could have a voice, and we would have a way to gauge whether or not our representatives were actually representing us?
I like the idea. The only issue I would have would be on the idea of the security of it in terms of cybersecurity. Make sure there's no redundancy, because we've always had redundancy in the voting in this country, at least in some precincts. And you know, the idea that I've always been in opposition, and this is unpopular, but I've always been in opposition to straight party voting, particularly in the Republican Party. The reason for that is you make it easy to go in, you check the R, and you're done. You don't have to worry about it.
Right.
And I think that alleviates the citizen and the citizen voter from the responsibility of doing their due diligence, properly vetting the candidates, going to the events, paying attention to the issues. And I really do believe that people have the responsibility to go down each individual race on a ballot and check the appropriate candidate. Now, with that said, if you are able to make it even easier for people just to log in and have a Facebook app or a Twitter app or whatever the case may be and vote on this, my only fear with that is, although I believe it's going to engender and encourage additional participation, if you will, I also am concerned that it will begin to diminish the fact that when you're free, liberty is participatory.
Right.
And sometimes that means showing up. And sometimes that means physically showing up. I love the idea of people to be able to voice their opinion, but there needs to be an understanding that even prior to doing that, because in a fake news, fake internet world, I would be fearful that if one of these referendums or initiatives were going to be coming out, that people could go online, find dubious information that may very well be released from the very candidate or the party days prior in order to sway that outcome. I guess in a long form way, I'm just saying I just don't trust the internet enough at this stage of the game, although I love the concept behind it.
When you were doing the research for the book and you were looking at the population was much smaller.
Oh, yeah.
The population had access.
Yes.
The population, they actually knew each other by name. It's kind of like what we have in possibly even the city council, maybe even much lower than that, but there's a community of people that know each other by name. But we've gotten so far away from that. Is our system, as it was designed, scalable? Is it scalable to 350 million? Is it scalable to 500 million? Is it scalable in its current configuration based on the way the Constitution, the amendments to the Constitution, the changes that have come about? Is it truly scalable in the House of Representatives and the Senate based on these fixed numbers, 100 senators, 435, and that's based on where population goes, so you can lose a rep, you can gain a rep based on your shift in population. But is 435, which when designed was representing a population of how many?
Oh, it was a handful of millions. The early days of the colonial period, you only had 2 million people in the entire country. 25% of them resided in Virginia alone, which is, in the furthest point of Virginia, a horseback ride to D.C. if you wanted to participate in that. The answer to your question is, of course, it is scalable, but there's got to be a price to pay. The very first entitlement program the United States government ever put together was, if you work, you're entitled to eat.
Right.
There was a payment, there was a penalty, if you will, although not imposed. There was the penalty of if you wanted to survive in the new country, and this even predates the United States, and this applies to almost every country in the world. You've got to go out and collect your own crops, collect your own water, and participate in the system. Right now, we've engendered this society, this community where you don't have to know who your senator is, or your representative, or the president for that matter. You can hang out at the beach on a skateboard all day long, and you're still going to get your pennies or your goodies or your programs or whatever the case may be, because we have moved more into a socialist environment. Back in the day, if you didn't participate, if you didn't play, again, you were going to suffer the consequences. Until we get to a point where our representatives, and it's unpopular, realize the fact that you've got to encourage people, you have to compel people to be American. All because you're born here. It's interesting in the book that I get through all these different things about each individual state. They go through every single state and tell just oddities, like Adolf Hitler's typewriter that wrote Mein Kampf on is in Bessemer, Alabama. In the state of Hawaii, unless you are of Hawaiian heritage or Polynesian heritage, you don't consider yourself Hawaiian, even if you're generationally been brought up there. You're a local or just a resident of the island. The reason that's important is all because you're born in America, by extension, in my opinion, doesn't make you American. It makes you just geographically an American, but it doesn't make you a participatory American. And people have got to understand that until we get back to that model, which was unintended by the founders, it just occurred naturally, until we get back to the point where if you don't participate, whether or not it be meaning being a landowner or whatever the case may be, we will never be able to extrapolate it out over 350 million people. It's a big task. It's an arduous task, but can it be done? Absolutely.
There's obviously, through all the shakeups at Fox, quite a concerted effort to discredit individuals in the media.
Right.
We saw people like Brian Williams, who was obviously somebody that confessed, got moved out. But now we have people who are surprisingly under attack. Sean Hannity. Most people don't know he goes on his way to work. He goes by his Catholic church every day and lights a candle. never missed a day. Here's a man that, whether I agree with Catholicism, don't agree with Catholicism, don't understand Catholicism, do understand Catholicism, doesn't matter. Here is a devout individual who is now having his reputation thrown out there with the rest of them.
Right.
Is this an attack on conservative media?
Yes. I don't know if it is as concerted as we would like to believe or that we think we believe. It is kind of a backdoor way, for my opinion, trying to re-implement the fairness doctrine, silencing conservative voices. It is a model that has worked time and time again. I like to refer to him as Bill O'Reilly being Herman Cain, for example. The problem isn't so much the attacks, in my opinion, it's the response to the attacks. If obviously it was successful with Bill O'Reilly. We had some debate on Thursday or Friday this past week. Jesse Waters went on vacation. Will he return? I don't really know. Obviously the attacks against Hannity as well. If organizations or individuals, like in the case of Hannity, don't stand up in defiance of these accusations, that is going to be a model that the Democrats are going to employ indefinitely and forever. And it's dangerous. And what's really funny, Rabbi, is it's as dangerous to them as it is to us. They don't seem to realize that the squelching of free speech will eventually affect them. Like they didn't realize the implementation of the nuclear option would eventually come back to bite them. And so they do these things, I believe, without really the adherence. Now, you also have to remember something that's kind of weird. And I've not heard anybody talk about this, but on my program, I've interviewed Paula Jones, Juanita Broderick, Kathleen Willey, and a couple of others accusers back in the Clinton days. These women have, and I believe them because I've talked to every one of them personally off the air, these women have become, in a sense, quasi-celebrity. Mm-hmm. We are celebrating the accusers, whether they are truthful or not.
Right.
And it's almost like that person that perpetrates that heinous crime for the purposes of publicity, notoriety, or just attention. I'm not saying these women do,
right,
but there are people on the outside that might think, hey, I accused Sean Hannity. Doesn't matter if it's, because he wasn't accused of sexual impropriety. He was accused of being weird and creepy. What is that?
Right.
But now all of a sudden you got a woman who's in the spotlight.
It's interesting. At the time we announced that we were launching this was tandem to Mark Levin
Mm-hmm.
saying, hey, I'm leaving the mainstream. I'm going to launch CRTV. I'm going to do it myself. This whole mess that's out there is just becoming sponsor-driven, sponsor-censored. You have to serve a master that is not the master you want to serve, and therefore we're not going to do that. Our position here at Revealing the Truth through the ministry is that we don't have sponsors. We don't sell advertising. We can talk about transgenderism. We can talk about Sodom and Gomorrah. We can talk about bestiality. We can talk about the thought that now that we've redefined marriage, we're going to see polygamy
Mm-hmm.
being proposed and passed. We're going to see that the advancement of and the growth of Islam in America is going to bring about a ruling that will allow within the Muslim community for them to marry 9-year-old girls, because that's what Muhammad did, and it's a fundamental principle of their quote-unquote faith system or ideology. And we're going to find the morality of America being shaped by interests that have nothing to do with American values. And we're watching this happen, and I see a shift. Credible media. If you want credible media, you have to go outside the mainstream.
Yes, you do.
If you want credible media, you have to go to programs like ours. You have to go to programs like Mark Levin. You have to go to programs that are not on broadcast media, because broadcast media has now been associated with special interest. When you have an O'Reilly claim, true or false, okay, it was already judged by the court of public opinion, and you have 90 sponsors pull money out, that means the company's got to fire you because you're affecting their income. The bias is now going to be purchased. Fox News is the last vestige of conservative mainstream television. Is there anybody else?
Not anybody that is of that scope. But on the flip side of it, it's very exciting for broadcast networks like this one, because it does give you an amazing amount of flexibility. It's almost like you've become somewhat of a Sirius XM kind of of a format. And the reason that's very relevant is because when you're not beholden to advertisers, O'Reilly loses a bunch of the advertisers. He's ousted. Half of them come back almost immediately, which confused me contractually speaking. But you're absolutely positively right. And I believe that online, not necessarily sponsored, I don't know how the funding of the capitalization would have to work in the long term. But the reality is, if you want truth in media, you're going to have to get it from outlets just such as this one. Pardon me. Now, I work for a company called Crawford Broadcasting. They host my program. They have never told me what to say on the air. They have never come at me and chastised me for saying something in the air. Although I am a Christian, it's a secular program, but we are a stately Christian corporation, and our CEO and our staff and upper management is all Christian. The point is that we are willing to throw an advertiser off the air. There's certain advertisers we will not accept for the very reasons you're talking about. That's very refreshing.
Yes.
But at the same time, it creates an environment sometimes where I feel like people, they feel like maybe our viewpoints, because we are statedly Christian, are jaded because of that. And, bless our little hearts, thank God for that. But the future of broadcasting is going to be, and I'm going to use the word boutique as it relates to my employer, but these more boutique type of companies that are, although we own dozens of radio stations, we are quite small compared to some of the larger broadcasts out there.
Right.
But by extension, the internet and programs such as this. And you nailed it on the head when you talked about being advertiser free. If you find a blog out there that's promoting progressive ideologies or liberal ideologies that's all eaten up with advertisers, or even an online broadcast, if that's all they are, that's dubious information. It could still be factual in their perspective,
sure,
but people don't seem to understand. I've said this, it's offensive, I don't care. News reporting is an entertainment industry. It is dollar denominated. It is dollar driven. The more dollars there are, the more advertisers there are, the more suspicious you have to be to what influence those advertisers are having as it relates to the program. I have never, I as a radio host have the right to throw an advertiser off my program if their ideas don't align with mine. That is very rare.
And I love that. And see, and we're donor supported, and we receive donations from individuals, from companies, from people who sponsor us without the advertising aspect of it. They send in their contributions, say, we want to make sure that you've got the bandwidth and you've got the ability to stay on the air. We're talking with Michael Hart, host of the Michael Hart Show, and our guest here on the first Monday of every month, but we won't be here the first Monday of June because we'll be in Israel. So you get a break. He is the author of Unknown America, Myths and Little-Known Oddities About the Greatest Nation on Earth. Michael Hart. I want to encourage you that right now, go to the Books and Media page at ignitinganation.com, click on Unknown America, get your own copy. Or if you want to go to, what's that website?
It's theunknownamerica.com, and we actually have it there with no shipping or handling charges, and it'll be autographed.
And an autographed copy. So the unknownamerica.com.
Theunknownamerica.com.
And get your own personal copy signed by Michael Hart. When we come back from break, we're going to dig into some of the more fascinating anecdotes and stories in this that will compel you to want to get your copy. We'll be right back. This is Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation Ministries, and your host for Revealing the Truth right here on the Igniting a Nation Broadcasting Network. I'm coming to you today with a very special offer from one of our very prominent guests, Dr. Carl Gallups. For your tax-deductible contribution of $30 or more, Pastor Carl Gallups will send you a signed copy of his new best-selling book, When the Lion Roars. In this book, you will discover what the Bible really says about the unprecedented demonic outpouring of the last days, the spirit of the days of Noah, the connection of technology and prophecy fulfillment, the spirit of Sodom and Gomorrah, apostasy in the last days church, why Turkey is central to last days prophecy, why Israel is the centerpiece of end-time prophecy, the historical truth about Islam and ISIS, the Shemitah, the mystery of 666, and how Christians in the church should respond to these prophetic times. We are living in intense but exciting times. We're living in prophetically unprecedented times. Be on guard, prepare your heart and mind. Make certain you have a biblical balanced understanding of our generation. Be ready with wisdom and perspective. We have been raised up for such a time as this. The lion of God's prophetic word is roaring. Do you hear its call? Send your check payable to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242.
Hi, I'm Angela Waite, and I just finished my interview on Revealing the Truth with Rabbi Eric Walker. I hope that in some way you will be touched by my story and that you will receive the healing you so desperately desire. I would like to share my story with you and send you a personalized signed copy of my book, Bomb Pops, Blow Dryers, and Butterfly Kisses, for your tax-deductible gift of $25 or more to Igniting a Nation, Inc. I will personally send you my book along with a note of encouragement as you take this journey with me. You will not only be supporting the work of Igniting a Nation, but all the proceeds that I receive from book sales goes to support Ramsey's Rescue, which targets the physical and spiritual care of the little ones who have been abandoned. It is the goal of this ministry to provide food, clothing, education, medical, a safe and loving home, and hope. Please help support both ministries with your gift and make a difference in so many lives today. Send your check payable to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. May the Lord bless you for your generosity and support.
This is the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of Revealing the Truth, right here on the Igniting a Nation Broadcasting Network, inviting you to join me every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday for our Prophecy in the News classes. Each week I take the headlines from around the world that have a biblical connection and present them in a way that brings the news and the Bible to life. There are over 2,500 prophecies in the Bible, and there are so few classes available to see how they connect with world events. We cover everything from Islamic terrorism to the changing relationships between Russia, Turkey, Iran, Syria, and Israel. Prophecy is unfolding before our very eyes, and to many, it is complicated and hard to understand. In just 1 hour each week, you'll be given the tools and the biblical connection to world events. With so much going on, and so few reliable sources of news, I encourage you to join me every Monday night at 7 o'clock p.m. at St. Mark United Methodist Church in Northport, every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. at Beechwood Baptist Church in Mount Olive, and every Thursday night at 7 p.m. at Mountain Chapel United Methodist Church in Vestavia. If you want to make sense out of what's happened in the world around you, this is the class for you. All are welcome. Times and location addresses can be found on our website at ianbn.com. I hope to see you there. Shalom. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're visiting in studio with Michael Hart, host of the Michael Hart Show. You can listen to him all over the world at Superstation 101. You can get it on the internet. You can get it on TuneIn radio app. I promise you, you will enjoy it. Monday through Friday from 3 p.m. Central Standard Time until 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, Monday through Friday. And author of Unknown America, Myths and Little Known Oddities About the Greatest Nation on Earth. Michael and I have been working together for many, many, many years, and all of our conversations are unscripted. It's because the natural inclination of being able to talk about what's going on in the world today comes easy when you're immersed in it and you pay attention. But there's things that you and I don't know. very, very willing to admit there's a lot of things I don't know. And this book, Unknown America, is, and I don't really know how to position it other than to say, you will be fascinated. You will be having conversations with people about things that they would just look at you and go, really? Where did you find that out? And you're going to start quoting Unknown America as your definitive source for myths and little-known oddities about the greatest nation on earth, America. Michael, what are some of the ones that were, tell me what was the most fun one for you to uncover? You had to pick through, I know you had, I would go in your office and you had piles, stacks of papers and documents that you were researching and extracting this information from. None of these are made up by you.
Oh no, they're researched and they're re-researched and they're verified and then researched one more time.
So what are some of the most noteworthy, fun ones that you can recall? And feel free, there's a stack of books in front of you, to pull some of them up.
Well, there's several of them. The first one, probably the single biggest one, and it's going to make me look like such a political nerd, is the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And every time you see a picture of the signing, it always shows a big wooden desk and a bunch of old white-haired guys standing around signing a document. The artist that paints most of these pictures paints them later in their lives when they become justices of the Supreme Court or presidents or whatever. When the original document was signed, John Hancock started it. It was a blank piece of paper. There was only one other person in the room. Now, this actually happens. They vote on this, the actual Independence Day for the United States. This isn't July 4th. It's July 2nd. That's when the vote takes place. It then takes several days to get all the signers on it. Hancock has always been the myth that signed it so large so that King George III wouldn't miss his signature. That couldn't be further from the truth. At the time, Hancock was terrified, if this thing doesn't work and my signature's too big, I'm the first one that's going to go out. So he signs it first, and then it goes to the various other people, the other signers, for it to be inscribed, and this takes, again, several days. But the first thing that ever went out was a blank piece of paper. Most of these guys, again, being portrayed as old white-haired guys, they were young. Now, Alexander Hamilton didn't sign the Declaration of Independence, but when it was signed, he was 21 years old. Jefferson was 39, and a lot of them were 18. Nathan Hale, I believe, was 21 years old. The list goes on and on. Franklin was 70, but most of the people that were in that room or in the convention, they were the millennials of their day. Now, they're arguably more mature than your average 25-year-old today, but people don't seem to understand that the formation of the United States of America was very much a young man and young women's game. That's probably one of the ones that compelled me the most. And then there's stories about the Star-Spangled Banner, and it has 5 verses in it, not just the one. But everybody says Francis Scott Key was held prisoner on a boat. He wasn't. He was there as an attorney to actually negotiate for the release of someone. He was held on the boat until the Battle of Baltimore Harbor, also known as Fort McHenry, was concluded. But he didn't look out and see a tattered banner, because the banner, the flag, because it was raining and was made out of wool, was brought down as the battle ensued. And they flew up a small little battle flag, which is what he saw. There's the story of Rosa Parks, which is completely just misaligned, and that of Betsy Ross. Betsy Ross did not sew our first American flag. That story was started 100 years later by her grandson.
Every child is taught certain things, whether it's Common Core or it was, when I was growing up, the Weekly Reader.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
You tape your little dime in the slot, and you remember that. We were all fed the same diet, the same information, the same stories. Mm-hmm. So when we tell the story of what Abraham looked like, it was always the stove pipe hat. Mm-hmm. It was always this. It was always that. These are things that people would almost argue if you were to challenge them, as if they were actually there,
right?
Because it's been so ingrained in our culture. Why write this? And this is volume 1, and I want to make sure that our audience understands this is the beginning, not the end. This will probably be a lifelong project for you.
I think it probably will be.
Because as much fun as you were having, why wouldn't you want to continue?
I've already got some stuff. I never knew, for example, Andrew Jackson, as president, was partly responsible for the Trail of Tears. I didn't realize that one of his sons was actually found on a battlefield, and he raised him. He was an Indian boy that was orphaned at a battlefield, that he was actually raised as his own son. A lot of people didn't realize that. The book's 154 pages long, and it's 154 pages long when it could be 15,000, because truthfully, I got to the point where I had to stop. I'm famous for saying on the air, there's a lot of history in the past. I didn't realize how accurate a statement that really is. And I got to the point, as you pointed out, there's probably going to be 100 editions of this. And then every individual chapter I'm going to break out and make it its own standalone book as well. But the problem is the research. There's a very conspiratorial entry in here about the extermination of the Jews and the roles that IBM played in that.
Absolutely.
And we get into whether or not the IBM did not exist during the Holocaust years, but its predecessor, the computer tabulating company, did. It was the invention of a guy by the name of Hermann Hollerith that actually developed the punch card technology that allowed the Nazis to catalog Jews for extermination. That company would eventually become IBM. Now, it's been debated over the years as to what they might have known and how much they knew and when they knew it. I don't get into all of those answers outside the fact that we do know they created the technology to allow the icy precision of the extermination of so many Jews. And then we get into the things about, the toy Twister, which was taken off the market temporarily because some people called it sex in a box. And so it gets into all kinds of things, everything from the heaviest of the heavy as it relates to the Holocaust to some just fun, ridiculous stuff, like one of Native Americans at one point in their life was employed by McDonald's. So there's just a lot of fun things in there.
I'm actually looking at that. It says, did you know 1 in 8 Americans have been employed by the fast food chain McDonald's? In more than half of all the United States, the highest paid public employee in the state is the football coach.
And that probably surprises nobody in the Southeastern Conference, but that's absolutely true.
It costs the United States government 1.8 cents to mint a penny and 9.4 cents to mint a nickel. So they lose a little bit on every nickel, but they try to make it up in volume.
It's exactly right.
It's interesting. Our currency is so out of sync with our economy. We are taxed on mill rates,
right?
And most people don't know what a mill is. They don't know why it's a mill. They don't understand the origin of this. And the currency at the time, it was a relative term. The currency of today, it's an irrelevant term. The efforts to get rid of the penny, the efforts to get rid of the nickel, the efforts to get rid of change and round up or round down has been argued by people forever, but it won't ever change. Countries changing currency, and now we have a case study in Europe with the euro.
Right.
That I think most would say that the euro was an abject failure.
I agree.
That in-country currencies, which still paralleled and existed, were devalued. And now you have, with Brexit, the pound sterling's return. In France, you're looking at the franc returning, at Italy, the lira, and all of a sudden we're going back to this. And all these are supported by hundreds of thousands of people that work in Forex, the foreign exchange world, and the currency world, and the commodities trading of currency world. And everything is economically driven. Everything. If you can't make money at it in this culture that we live in, whether or not you are a Marxist, left-wing, fascist, give everything to everybody, everything includes money. So the distribution of wealth, they focus on distribution, they forget the word wealth.
Right.
Some of these anecdotes that you share, in a way, are a magnifying glass on perpetual problems and challenges in our society. Money being one of them.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that we would, as a government, stamp out nickels that cost us double what they're worth, and they're not even worth the nickel.
Right. And a lot of people won't even use them because we're doing everything online now. There'll be a time, and it might be as long out as 10 years, it might be 2, where you won't even see currency. I want to say somewhere in the neighborhood, estimates vary, that between 3 and 7% of all the dollars in America, and I mean denominationals, actually reside in a paper form. I pay all my bills online. You probably do the same thing.
I have a checkbook that I've had for 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
I start all my checkbooks at 200 so that it doesn't appear like it's a new account.
Right.
And I think I just the other day signed check number 226. Means
Right.
26 checks in 25 years.
Right.
And I was forced, the only thing I could do was give a check.
Right. Right. I know. It's moving so far away, and people just, they don't understand that. They don't understand what's transpiring in the world. And what's really interesting about the book is, for all the entries that it has in it, putting the entries to the side, just learning the things that we have been taught over the years that are complete falsehoods, and you begin to kind of see, and it's not even always intentional. Sometimes it's just lore that has been passed down where people just accept for as common practice. And so if people don't understand the history of this nation, and when I say history, I don't mean back to the colonial days exclusively, but just the history of the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, and 80s, then you begin to realize that there is a whole narrative in this country today that people such as you and I can only report on because the majority of us are not participating in it. And a lot of the information that's contained in here is things that has just worked its way into the commonly accepted vernacular, and we take it as face value. And because of that, we get exploited economically.
What was the most stunning revelation that you uncovered in here that made you stop almost dead in your tracks and say, wow, I'm shocked by that?
I don't know if I can answer that question, because it's funny is that I will sit in bed at night and read the book that I wrote and just continue to shake my head at some of the, one of the things that I mentioned to you last night. Did you know in colonial America, a child did not typically receive a name until it was 2 years old? Because in colonial America, children, the mortality rate was somewhere in the neighborhood of between 45 and 50% up to your first 6 years, regardless of your socioeconomic status. And there has just been one after the other after the other. Historically speaking, we've often looked towards religious groups such as the Puritans.
Right.
And the Puritans, well, they weren't so pure. The Puritans, of the women in the colonial period that went to the altar, 30% of them, by some estimates, were pregnant. When they went to, and we're talking 14, but they were Puritans. Well, they had a thing called bundling back in that day, where to determine whether or not a boy and a girl were compatible for marital bliss, they put them in a bed together, fully clothed, and put up what they called a bundling board between them and let them stay up all night long and talk. Well, sometimes it was either successful or not successful, depending on your point of view. And it's just one after the other. The story of Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks wasn't the first woman to not give up her seat on a Montgomery bus. It was a 15-year-old girl by the name of Claudette Colvin. Told the story 100 times. Why didn't they use Claudette? She was unmarried. She was pregnant by a white guy. So the optic didn't, and she was mouthy and feisty, so the optic didn't look very good. Betsy Ross, she was a seamstress, but she didn't sew our very first flag. George Washington was asked about her. Supposedly there was a convention or a conference that went together to bring Betsy Ross in, that George Washington was the leader of the meeting to bring Betsy Ross in. Years later, he was asked about it. He had no idea who Ross even was. 100 years later in New York City, her grandson, in order to exploit her reputation and to make a dollar, created the whole flag story. It's one after the other, after the other, after the other. And it'd be hard for me to really just, now there's some in there that I thought fascinating. The year that Jack Nicklaus won his first Masters, there was a hockey team, a basketball team, and a football team that all won national championships that year. And Willis Shoemaker also won the Triple Crown. He won his last Masters at the end of his career. The exact same teams won again on the exact same date. Now that might not be fascinating to you. To me, it's kind of like time travel. So there's just a bunch of things in there. Some are a sentence long, some are 2 pages long. But I think if I had to point out anything, it's the story such as Parks. It's the story such as Betsy Ross, the story of the Declaration of Independence, that history was forced to fabricate for the purposes of advancing an idea that was not in concert with the truth. So in that sense, it was a larger spectrum of that intention as opposed to any one particular event.
So these are really the foundational stones for what we're hearing as fake news, or we're hearing as like this, what's her name, Rachel Dalzell, that comes up with this idea that I identify as an African American woman, therefore I am. This whole idea that all you have to do is put that out there, continue to tell that story over and over and over again, and it becomes credible, and now other people start repeating it, and now that becomes fact.
Right.
As you embrace the items which you left out, which I know that there was many more that you left out than you included, what are we going to see in the next book?
Well, the next book will contain a lot of the same information, but it's my intention to expand out on it. In this book, I do reveal that America's already had its first female president. America's already had its first homosexual president. Now, some of this is conjecture.
And they were both Barack Obama.
Actually, there's some sections in there on all the different presidents, but no, James Buchanan, who was the president before Lincoln, was actually thought to have been homosexual, and his relationship with a man who was a senator from the state of Alabama, and they found his love letters to him some years later, so we know this to be factual. Everything in the book is going to have an expansion of that individual subject matter, and then things like Andrew Jackson's son actually being an Indian child that was orphaned,
right.
that was never reported. We're going to get into things like the very first case of spam in the United States and what that looked like. That'll be on the chapter on Americana. A little more expansion on the life and times of the president. People don't realize, I can't even quote all of it, but July 2nd, 1776, the party that was thrown down with the representatives of the Continental Congress. I mean, you think people party now? No. You know, people don't know the Library of Congress was actually seeded with the books that belonged to Thomas Jefferson. They got together, bought his library out because he couldn't afford to pay all of his bills from all his partying.
Right.
And I want to expand and elaborate on that a little bit more as well, and kind of humanize. And that's probably one of the things I've enjoyed the most about doing it. John Adams owned a dog one time named Satan. You know, just little things like that people are going to want a little bit more of an expansion. But I got a whole host of other nuggets that are going to make their way in there as well. Great.
Michael Hart, Unknown America, Myths and Little-Known Oddities About the Greatest Nation on Earth. So many different ways to get it. TheUnknownAmerica.com. You can go to the Books and Media page at ignitinganation.com. But if you want a signed copy with no shipping charge at all, go to TheUnknownAmerica.com and order it straight from Michael Hart. You'll learn about when America really declared her independence, why portraits of the signing of the Declaration are completely wrong, who is the real father, or maybe it should be mother, of rock and roll, what Kleenex tissues were actually invented for, which movie star Governor George Wallace wanted as a presidential running mate in 1972, and so many things that you didn't know that you wanted to know, but when you find them out, you'll know you wanted to know them. Michael Hart, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Look forward to seeing you back here in July, as we will be in Israel, shooting live from Israel during the month of June. So I hope to see you again soon. Keep in touch, my friend. Definitely. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth. We'll be right back.